Well, Uncle Doug,
Uncle Mark.
we are joined today. We have a quorum, and we are joined today by our friend and dear uncle, Uncle Dan.
Hello
All
down
those in
there, Uncle
favor?
Dan.
All those in favor, affirm.
By the
and
raising of the uplifted hand.
I don't know. Dan's got a how-to up his sleeve, and I don't know exactly what it is, and I'm excited to delve into it because rumor has it that it's a little bit of a free-form philosophical version of our how-to.
Do tell, Uncle Dan.
We're getting beatnik here, fellas. We're gonna go. We're gonna go free form. We're gonna get it loosey goosey. We're just gonna have some fun. Because here's the thing. I was just today, last night and today, in a bit of a conversation with someone that I know that's dear to me, who's going through a really rough time. And I had very little to offer her in terms of comfort, but we were talking. It's part of it turned, and just on my end, to an exploration of the question of what gives life meaning when you don't have God. Now, as someone who's been doing atheist-themed podcasting, and then before that, atheist-themed blogging for years now. I have become the de facto out and proud atheist in all of my friends' lives. And so whenever the believers among them want to sort of marvel at my non-theism, they'll ask me the question, well, what gives your life meaning? And I've heard that question so much. So I thought, maybe this is a thing that we should discuss, is how to meaning. How to go through your life now that you don't have divine purpose guiding you.
Yeah, now that you're devoid of a lot of Iron Age fairy tales that really aren't very good. How do you put? And I'm not being too flippant there, but we've convinced ourselves, as Doug explored a little bit in his apologetics game. We've convinced ourselves that there is great meaning in those stories. Our job at The Heretic here is to show that there really isn't. So one way to look at it is to say to religious people, you have no more meaning from those stories than anybody has from not having those stories.
You've hit on something really important, and that is that all of these people who talk about, I don't know how you feel like your life has any meaning now that you don't believe in God. Guess what, dude? God doesn't give life much meaning. I mean, there's this whole sense of, they like to talk about how, God gives divine purpose to my life or whatever. Does he? And if he does, is that purpose worth anything? Because it's not your own. You don't have anything to do with that purpose. That's some other dude's purpose. And and at best, the purpose that being a divine son or daughter of God it gives you is in relation to something else. Like, the best purpose you've got is I get to be, I don't know, a nice little boy. I get to be a good little boy. I don't know. I don't know what that gives me.
It's strange to me because on this show especially, we take books of the Bible, stories from religion, etc., and pull them apart and try and find the nugget of morality or truth or words to live by. And oftentimes we find either nothing or things that are truly dreadful.
Right.
And so for some strange reason, it's incumbent on people who don't believe in any of these fairy tales to come up with the meaning of the universe when it's not incumbent on the people who say they have the meaning to actually reveal it.
Right.
If you're religious and you believe in these stories, you should be the one to have to say what you think the purpose and meaning of life is. And, it shouldn't be incumbent on people who don't believe in the fairy tales of Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy to have that. I think it's a strange reversal that we're the ones who are thought of as not having meaning when it's really we're the ones who spend our time examining that meaning and ourselves far more than most religious people do.
Well, when I was a Mormon, and you guys remember being Mormons, when we were all Mormons, I was told that the meaning of this life of this mortal existence, this earthly sort of pit stop in our eternal journey, was that it was a test. We were basically being quizzed on, are we good enough to live exalted lives later on?
Right.
And
in
frankly,
fact, who was it that said? Sorry to interrupt one sec, Dan, but who?
Yeah.
I think you said, Doug. It was the Mormons call it immortal probation.
Yeah,
which is just a horrendous way to look at life. But go ahead. Immortal probation.
It's so stupid. I mean, an omnipotent, an all-knowing God has to somehow put us through our paces in order to determine if we're good enough. He can't just know that we're good enough or whatever. It's, first of all, that I find a deeply unsatisfying answer to the question, what is the purpose of my life? Like, if the purpose of my life is, can I be good enough to pass this test?
Right.
I find that deeply unsatisfying.
And,
I don't know about you
I would
guys.
go you one further and call it very unfair, because the consequences of screwing up are eternal.
Right.
If I take a bad turn, or I have a bad week, or I do something bad to somebody, and before I can atone for it or whatever, I die, I'm fucked.
Right.
It's such a rigged test.
It's so rigged that, like, not only are you fucked if you don't do it right, but you've been created in such a way that you are fatally flawed on all of these points, and somehow you have to overcome the manner in which you were created, and be better than the creation of the person who created you, who is also the person conducting the test. It's ridiculous.
It's as Christopher Hitchens says, what kind of loving God creates you sick and commands you to be well?
Right.
Right. So I think that, and I've observed for years, growing up unhappily in Mormonism and just wanting out, I observed all the people around me, and, my incredibly dysfunctional family, my, relatives, the people in my community, everybody was a fucking Mormon, right? Everybody around me. So, but I observed what they thought was meaning. Meaning to them was obeying the fucking rules. And I think they mistook the deep philosophical search for truth and meaning and the struggle. They didn't want that. What they did was they stuck to a bunch of rules, and they thought that's what meaning was.
And if you look at their individual lives, if you look at the individual lives of these believers who say that they've got so much meaning from their belief, it doesn't look like they have meaning from their belief.
Statistically, they're no better off, if not worse, than any atheist or secular population in
but not
terms
only
of
that,
happiness index, etc.
Right, but not only that, if what's giving you meaning is your belief in God and your relationship to God and your belief, your relationship to your set of dogma, then shouldn't every bit of your life be devoted and dedicated to that? If that's the only thing that gives you meaning, why aren't you out proselytizing for the rest of your life only? But no, they're paying their bills, they're driving their kids to work, to soccer or whatever, to school, they're going to work, they're shuffling papers around. It's clearly not what they're saying it is. The thing that's giving them meaning is not the thing that they're actually that they're believing is giving them meaning. So,
and this goes to one of the most common tropes that you kind of encounter as an atheist talking to religious people, and it's you guys will recognize this instantly. It's, well, if you're an atheist, why do you get out of bed in the morning, or why don't you just kill people? Which and we've all encountered that many, many times. And the easiest answer to that is, you mean you would if you didn't, if you were not a religious person, is that what you would do? Of course not.
Right.
It's just,
but it speaks to an insecurity about that, right? Like that question says everything about the questioner and nothing about you or me.
Correct.
Right. What in the world? How close to the jagged edge of a killing spree are you at any moment?
Right.
But the Sermon on the Mount somehow stops you.
Exactly.
Right? Or something in the book of Ezekiel prevents you from just fucking running amok with your dick out. Like,
Absolutely.
I don't. That's it. That also is. It comes from an enormous place of ignorance.
Right.
Where they may think that it is their religion that stops them from murdering.
Right.
But chances are it is an ethical code that is outside of religious belief.
It's the same thing that stops secular people from murdering. It's a terrible thing to do.
Right. Well,
it's
and we can sort of, really reasonable minds may differ on what it is that keeps us all sort of in a pro-social mindset. But I do want to talk. But it does seem to be just a function of being a human rather than a function of being a human with a magic heavenly daddy.
Right.
And
who believes in a flying horse or whatever. Yeah.
So, as in the early part of the 20th century, as philosophy sort of discovered this notion that maybe there's no God, and what does that mean? Of course, that gave rise to absurdism, and it gave rise to existentialism, and all of these ideas. And I did want to touch on sort of one of the points that gets the most scary for people, and that is that if my life has no meaning, and it doesn't appear to me that there is no inherent meaning to anybody's life, because we are just specks on a rock hurtling through space among billions of other rocks, and it's like, in the end, the universe doesn't care about Hitler. The universe doesn't care about the most important things in our lives. The universe doesn't give a shit about. So
it only cares about white girls and their Saturday afternoons. We know that's true. That's true.
I mean, Kim Kardashian matters. The rest of us don't. So what do we do now that we've acknowledged that we don't matter? Camus.
First of all, I think. Yeah, sorry.
I was about to launch into Camus. So if you've got something to say, say it before we get there.
When I heard Camus, I stepped the fuck back. but I think I just want to punctuate what you just said. The point of what you just said. I think there is so much significance in the acknowledgement of the insignificance. There's such great power in having a realistic view of what you are in the physical universe. And yes, there's lots of rocks flying around, and yes, there's lots of stuff, but there's mostly nothing, right? The most of what's out there is the nothing.
Right.
And we touched on this very briefly with our friend Aaron Ra when he came on the show, which is there is so much beauty in that understanding, and there's so much the fact that people are afraid to acknowledge that we are primates, the fact that people are afraid to acknowledge that we share DNA with cabbages and coral, right. is so strange and fearful to me when I think there's nothing more beautiful than the improbability of all of this coming together and us happening and having this brief window of consciousness, and some of us actually having a fairly decent go at it. Whereas that's not always been the case, and it still does not remain the case that everybody has a decent go of it. So it's a beautiful thing to know that everything you understand will disappear and not matter in 100 years. So that acknowledged, let's go to Camus.
Well, I feel like that's where we're headed. What all of what you just said is sort of where I'm aiming my gun here. But I wanted to move through some of the sort of the past thinking and how we got to this point. And Albert Camus is part of that. His sort of titular book or long essay, the myth of Sisyphus, is part of this. And you'll recall that Sisyphus was the mythological, Greek. I'm thinking Greek.
Yes.
Myth.
Yeah, we talked about the labor of Sisyphus in our when we talked about Tartarus, the Greek hell.
Right. So Sisyphus was doomed forever to push a boulder up a hill, and then it would roll back down, and he would have to go get it and push the boulder back up the hill. And Camus discussed that as being sort of the perfect metaphor, or a possible metaphor for human life without any sort of meaning. And he asked the question, is this a life worth living? He basically, what he did is he said, look, if we have no meaning that we can see, We can either jump to a conclusion, and the conclusion is that there is a God beyond this world who who there's much more meaning than we can see and than we can know, and we have to hold tightly to that idea. Or maybe we have to commit suicide because meaninglessness is terrible. And Camus proposed that there's a middle ground where meaninglessness doesn't mean that we have to commit suicide, but rather it's just sort of part of life, and we just have to acknowledge it and live with it. So Camus proposed...
That's where goths come from.
Right, yes, well, something like that. That's one of the stages of absurdism, and then you have to move through that too. So, so Camus, sort of the basic idea is that it's not it's about the hour of walking back down the hill to get your boulder. That's the moment of sublimeness. That's the moment that you can be thinking about whatever, that you can just be in thought, be in relation to your life. And, and then you hit the boulder again and you move back up the hill. I don't know that that's my favorite way of looking at it. But that's sort of a nutshell wrapping up of Camus. I think that I'm more in the sort of Uncle Mark way of looking at things. And I think what we've come to as a philosophical society of non-believers is just that. We all have to sort of, it's not that we all have to find our own meaning, but we all have to find what makes our lives worthwhile, and that's individual. And you have to find the things that mean something to you. It's not what gives your life meaning. It's because your life honestly has no meaning, or that could be a thought. But it's what gives your life purpose, and it's what makes you happy. And that's important.
And I think the three of us have reached a level of, amongst many other people who've escaped religion, you kind of get to that epiphany point where you're like, okay, you know what? Maybe the universe doesn't owe me an explanation. And maybe the sublimeness of our relation to not only the plants and animals around us, but the stars above us is physically real and significant. But what we're contending with people who are just leaving religion is, imagine if you grew up and believing that Santa Claus was real, and you believed this into your adult life.
Right. And
so there was a judge who was rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. He was the source of good things for you. You persisted in that belief into your adulthood. Imagine the psychological damage. I mean, it's hard enough for 8-year-olds to dispel that myth, right? Yeah. It's hard enough for them to let go of that and kind of embrace a much larger and darker, potentially darker worldview, that there is no big judge out there. And that it's their parents giving them, their imperfect parents that give them gifts once a year.
I love that it's just a little aside, that's disappointing. Right. Oh, it's just from those assholes.
But see, that's the funny thing.
Presents.
That's what's so crazy and it's disappointing to adults when they leave religion that there's not a larger force out there judging, and because that's comforting in a very dark and sadistic way. So, people have to let go of that, and it's hard to let go of. It's been programmed into you.
Yeah, exactly right. Like when you just sit there and think that there is nothing between us and the cold fucking vacuum of space, but what, a mile and a half or a few miles of gas.
Right.
There's nothing there. And if you really start thinking about that, you can get yourself worked up into a pretty existential state of terror.
Right.
And that's what religion does for people, is it keeps you from thinking about that shit.
Right.
You give up so much of your life, and in exchange you get all the answers.
Correct.
You don't have to wrestle with them. And so I think
it's insulation against some very scary thoughts.
That is absolutely true.
Right. That your children, the very lamentable possibility that one of your children dies, that they're not someplace where they're loved and safe and free from disease, right? They're just dead.
Right. Yeah.
Or your parents or your loved ones. So I think what's really very clearly hard for a lot of people leaving religion is they think that all the space inside of them that the religion filled is going to instantly get filled by something else.
Right.
Right? That same blanket is going to be there, but in a different form.
Right.
And chances are it's not going to be. And it requires a bit of a rewiring of your brain to go, when people ask me, they find out about our podcast or whatever, people at work, and they're like, well, where do we go after we die? And I say, I don't know, but neither does the Pope or the Dalai Lama.
Right.
And it is embracing the uncertainty. It is embracing, and it's accepting that you may never actually find capital M meaning. Right. You may never. There is not somebody sitting on top of a mountain that you're going to climb one day who's going to tell you what the meaning of life is. You're just going to have to. You're probably going to have to, patch it together yourself and find what is meaningful to you, and that's not easy if every philosophical conundrum has been pre-chewed for you prior.
I agree with that completely. However, on the other side of that coin, have you guys been to the Field Museum in Chicago?
No.
It's one of the greatest natural history museums on the planet. But imagine any natural history museum. To go to one of those as a religious person, which I did, and to wander those halls and have to look at every one of those little placards and try and figure out how to hammer that square peg into the round hole of my stupid faith.
Yeah.
Right.
And then to go back as a non-religious person and just bathe in this the glory and the knowledge and and the lack of knowledge about all of these things is a wholly expansive experience compared to the stifling. It's just hard to get there. Once you're there, there's no going back.
Right.
But the journey, to your point, Dan, the journey from having all the answers and all being wrapped up in the center of a warm little tiny universe, and then stepping into what is the vastness of our current actual universe is pretty scary.
Yeah, it's so funny to me because there's this notion that, and again, the other question that I always hear is, well, you got to believe in something bigger than yourself. I hear this from other atheists who believe in something that, that they call a higher power, or they believe in an energy or whatever. And they're like, but you got to believe in something bigger than yourself. To which I point at everything around me and go, it's all bigger than me.
Right.
Point at the
mountain,
sun. That's there.
The sun, everything's bigger than me except the things that are smaller than me. But, I just don't understand why that's none of it's a necessary thing. It is possible to just look at the world, at the universe, at the physical reality around us, at the natural order of things, and say that's enough. That's plenty.
Yeah.
We don't need any more.
That's more than enough. Yeah.
And to encounter it as it is, with all of the ugliness, while there's gorgeous beauty everywhere, and that's what I seek out because I enjoy it more than the ugliness. I love flowers, and I love a mountain walk, and I love a lake in the spring. And, but I still acknowledge the existence of wasps that drill into people's eyeballs and murder them. You know what I mean? Like, all of this stuff exists at the same time. And all of the things that we love could be gone tomorrow if an asteroid hits. And that's all.
The universe it's neutral. The universe is completely neutral. And it's funny, I was having a very nice chat with an older friend of mine the other day that I work with, and he's kind of an Oprah Winfrey, 800 thread count general religious person, right? The kind of, Buddhism's good, Jesus was nice, not really getting into too many details.
Right.
And the question of God came up, and he said, well, can't God just be in the earth and the trees and all around us? And I was like, sure.
Right.
It can be anything you want.
Yeah.
We all make it up. It's all made up.
Right.
What you just said is as valid as 2,000 plus years of Catholicism. So you do you. Of course, if that gives you meaning, God is in the rocks and the trees. Sweet.
Right.
But all you're doing is just relabeling things.
You're just relabeling things.
You're just taking a bunch of rocks and trees and stuff that are already there and then saying, well, there's God. Well, okay.
Right.
But that doesn't mean anything. It's still rocks and trees and things.
We talked about this, I think, on another episode. Maybe I was on TGIA, but there was this brilliant documentary about a previously unknown species of hominid, of nearly human, that they found in this cave in South Africa. Maybe you guys have seen it. It's called the Morning Star Cave.
Yeah.
And it was a really strange animal. It had super long arms and weird short body and odd head and everything. But it was a cousin, right? And an artist did a depiction of it walking along the African savannah, however 300, 400,000 years ago, however long ago it lived. And my reaction to seeing that picture was I got so mad. I got so fucking mad at all of the effort that every living fucking thing put into staying alive and reproducing so your stupid Christian ass could be on the earth in 2018 going, everything happens for a reason. Like the randomness, the struggle that creature had to eat, to live, to survive, to understand,
right?
With a nearly human mind, to understand what was the natural world around it, is just fuck him,
right?
Fuck them. They didn't exist. There was a flood. That's all I need to know. It's the arrogance of putting us, and by us I mean God, by putting a human mind, a human intelligence at the center of every philosophical question of the universe.
Right.
It's God. It's God. It's a man, but a Superman.
It's such a cop-out. I agree. That's a really great way of thinking about it, is that we owe it in some degree to the mud skipper, 1.5 billion years ago that first drew oxygen into its proto-lungs. That directly led to us. We owe it to that little fucking thing and the weird long-armed hominid to be real and smarter and to use this enormous brain we have been given.
To not be an idiot, and to not take the simplest possible answer that there's a wizard in the sky who makes everything, who takes babies who died and puts them in an eternal nursery. It's just
as a personal idiot, I'm going to dial you both back and say I don't think we owe it to anybody to do any goddamn thing. Those mud skippers are dead. All of that, evolution doesn't have any meaning either. We're just here.
No, I disagree only that I think they're understanding a thing is respecting a thing in a way. And I think it's understanding the enormous, the oceans of time and fucking and eating and everything that placed you in this place. It is a good thing for you to understand and
I think it's
and
nice
not
to
pretend
appreciate.
didn't happen.
But here's where I'm coming from. One of the things that I wanted to get to that is just sort of has become almost the entirety of my personal philosophy at this point is simply this. I know where this life. I know like two things about this life. One, that I'm doing
this
it
is
right
a testimony.
now. Right. And two, that it's going to end. And I know that. I know that I'm going to die. And there's an end point, and whether that's tomorrow or in 40 years or whatever, or in 130 years, depending on how I do, it's still coming. So my whole thing, and this is sort of what I told my friend online, in this little conversation that started me thinking this morning, which was, look, all I got is this life, and she had asked me, is it worth it? And I said, I don't know if it's worth it. I don't, in terms of all the positive things in my life versus all of the pain and the suffering in my life, in some sort of mathematical calculus of what isn't, did it come out on the plus side or the minus side? I got no interest in that whatsoever. All I know is I've got X amount of time. I don't know what that X stands for, but I know that it ends. And I know that I can just take as much of that as I can and squeeze as much juice out of this life as I possibly can. So I am going to jump out of some airplanes, and I'm going to hike a mountain, and I'm going to see as much of the world as I possibly can, as long as it appeals to me. And I'm going to fuck a bunch of people, and I'm going to love a bunch of people, and I might get into a fight or two. And I'm just going to try life, and I'm going to keep trying it until I'm done. And
until you fail.
Yeah. Well, I've failed plenty. I fail constantly. I am a constant failer. And it doesn't...
I mean, until you fail at staying alive. But yes, I get you.
There's that. But I mean, I love the idea of failing, because the truth of the matter is that one of the things that is so great about not believing in a God is that the failure doesn't matter. I can fail at everything. I can fail 100,000 times, and the trying might be the fun part. So I can relieve myself of so many pressures just by realizing, look, it's fine. It doesn't matter. You know, I wrote a book and nobody wanted to read it. So what? I tried it. You know, I went, I applied for X job and didn't get it. Okay. You know, this life, I know what the destination is already. So it's about the journey. The only thing that's interesting is the journey.
Yeah, so what I think you've presented here is a reverse Pascal's wager. Right?
Okay.
Absolutely, which is, religious people saying to non-believers, well, what if you're wrong? Right? Then you're going to hell.
Right.
Because this particular sect of Christians that worship a resurrected Jew say a certain thing about what to eat on what day of the week, and if you fuck that up, you're going to hell. Right? What if you're wrong? So I would say what you just presented is the reverse of that, or the inverse of that, which is, okay, well, what if you're wrong? What if, as we were talking about our Mormon friends earlier, this life is just the waiting room for the next life, so you'll sacrifice any risk-taking, any fun, any exploration, any of that stuff, because maybe on the other side of the coffin is, one of our heavens.
Right.
And I think that's a disgraceful way to look at your own life. Right? What if, indeed...
It's just a really good way to throw it away.
And there's nothing there. Right. Yeah, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Then you've wasted the one little thing you got, the one glimpse of light you had in an uncaring universe.
And let me just to be clear, we don't hate religion because we don't hate religion. We don't kind of espouse our lack of religiosity because of ill will or psychological damage, even though there's plenty of both of those.
Right.
We are applying the brain we have, the brain that exists between our ears, to these dogmas, as you should do with all things. So we tear apart the book of Job using the brain that we have. We attack it at the same level we attack a novel by John Grisham or a movie by Quentin Tarantino. We just find them lacking.
Right.
And life has so much more to offer out there for people that no one we know that has left religion and found the vastness of the universe is tempted to go back because the doctrine sings to them. They're tempted to go back because their families are mean to them. And I guess that's my long-winded way of saying, Dan, I totally agree. I think that this is such, to my mind, having been on both sides of the coin, a far more sublime, interesting, engaging, and meaningful life than I ever found inside religion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to some extent, I read this today. Somebody said that the trip from believer to non-believer isn't a choice; it's a discovery. For most people, it's not that we chose to stop believing in God; it's that we examined the evidence for long enough to go, "Oh fuck, I think I can't support this belief anymore." So a lot of us are just stuck with it. We didn't choose it. We just realized it. And so now we have to move on with our lives, and we have to find a way to do that with joy, hopefully, and with interest. So I mean, and that's on each of us. Each of us is going to do that differently. Each of us is going to find a different meaning. But it's on you to get out there and just squeeze some juice out of this life. You get it once. You get one shot.
I think what you were talking about just a second ago, which is it's not a choice; it is an inevitable process of of being awake, right? That you are going to there's a high degree of probability that if you start life religious, you're going to end it not so much. And a perfect example of that was our friend Rabbi Gruber, who was on one of our earlier episodes. Yeah, who was as deeply into. He was a straight-up rabbi. He was deeply into Jewish text and mysticism and the Torah as deeply as you could go. And inside of 1 month, he's like, "Yep, I'm not." And again, it wasn't a choice for him. It was simply honestly looking at what the world presented to him as evidence. Right. So, but in that transition, for a lot of people, there is a lot of fear, and I think you're exactly right, Dan. It is just eat what fruit you can while there's fruit to be had, and make hay while the sun shines, because at some point, the sun's going to stop shining for you. And
and also let's
embrace
not forget,
that.
I think that's great. I want to sort of close this out, because I think we'll need to revisit this topic many times. But I do want to sort of end with the notion, with the declaration, at least for myself, because I can't speak for everybody, as much as I want to try. I want to say that, like, accepting my own tininess in the universe, my own meaninglessness, my own death, my own understanding that I won't continue after I die, accepting all of those things didn't make me panic. In the long run, it didn't make my life worse. It actually gave me a very deep and very soulful sense of peace. And so I just want to sort of give those of our listeners who may be worried about it as they stare into a void, the assurance that it's not necessarily the stuff of nightmares. It can be the stuff of joy and glory.
Yes, and that void is not staring back at you. It is just a void. So I think it's a beautiful thing. I think we've cracked it. We've found all the answers, and you're welcome, everyone.
We solved it.
We solved it. So now we can move on. Easy enough.
Let's move on.